Thanks, Micah. So the first thing that I should point out, and Micah has it on the right slide for this, is that I have some biases that you should be aware of before we go through any of this information. My first bias is that I'm a transhumanist. So that doesn't mean I'm a technology cheerleader, but it does mean that I'm something of a technology optimist, as this group knows well. That's kind of where we are. So you might even take into consideration your own biases on this topic as we discuss it. You know, if you're also a transhumanist, which I believe almost everybody, if not everybody who's on this call is, you might wonder, well, does that mean I'm a little bit more of a risk taker when it comes to emerging technologies, or to, just everyday technologies, more of a risk taker than somebody else? And how might that influence the way that I look at information, things like that. But that's one bias to be aware of. Another bias to be aware of is that I run a business in this space. So I have a financial bias, and you can take that for what it's worth. It, on the one hand, means I know a lot about this topic. On the other hand, it means that I have financial incentives to promote it. So you can take the good and the bad of that into consideration as you listen to what we talk about. Next slide, Micah. All right, so this is our agenda. We're going to first talk about, and I really would like this to be more of a discussion than me just talking at you. So I'd like us together to talk about what human enhancement is in general, and then how nootropics and Gerald Protectors fit in to human enhancement. We'll talk about that together. Then after that, we'll dive into dietary supplements in particular. And this is broken out into 3 areas that reflect the kinds of questions that CTA board members asked me when we proposed this topic, the kind of information that people would be interested in hearing about. So we'll talk about what are the best nootropics, the best Gerald Protectors, and then maybe some supplements that we should either just ignore or avoid as we make our choices on how to use these things. So that's the agenda. Go ahead to the next one, Micah. And so let's talk about human enhancement. What is human enhancement? Does anybody want to throw out a definition of human enhancement? Crickets. Everybody's afraid of being wrong. There's no wrong answers, right? Come on.
Well, when I got my hip replaced, they did it with titanium. So, and the doctor told me, he's been doing this for years. And it used to be they used to use some other material and it wouldn't last as long. But now with the titanium, it's supposed to last 15, 20 years or something.
There you go.
We've got answers in the chat. Improvements over evolution and increasing human capabilities by any means. There you go.
Yeah, so I suppose that would be improvements over natural biological evolution. Perhaps cultural evolution and technological evolution would be forms of human enhancement then.
Our vocation fulfilled to emerge to our max capabilities.
Maximum capabilities. Helping evolution out from Elias. Yeah, hopefully helping it out in ways that are consistent with our values and desires, and not with the seemingly far more neutral values and desires of natural biological evolution.
Well, Lincoln, actually, I think Jonathan brought up this vocational idea, and that actually does sound like it's kind of part of this thing. When we say human enhancement, it seems like it's implying something about what we care about enhancing, or something like this, right? It's not just enhancing us as a collection of cells; it's enhancing us in some other kind of capacities, perhaps. At least that's something that I hear in that.
Yeah. Also saw fulfilling God's plan for humanity or something like that. It flashed up briefly on my screen. Yeah, from a Christian transhumanist perspective, of course, human enhancement is part of the plan. But, we might question, well, what is enhancement within that context? And I think a lot of us would agree that it is not only the effort to improve maybe our strength or our beauty or our longevity or our intelligence, but even perhaps our virtues would be an important enhancement to make from a Christian transhumanist perspective. And also from various secular transhumanist perspectives would agree with that as well, to be fair. I saw a couple others flash up there, but I missed them. Micah, or somebody, could you read those?
Software development, city building, technology, emergence, and design interweaving. So the kind of looking at the way infrastructure maybe enhances who we are, I think, as a society, as individuals.
That's something that comes out of agile thinking in software development, that you get this mix of emergence, and you do a short-term sprint, and then the next idea emerges out of what you've done. And it struck me that if you build a city over a century, then you go through the same thing. You have a sprint based on railroads, a sprint based on cars. Seems very similar.
Actually, Jonathan, evolution could do the same thing. And there's a phenomenon called epistasis where you have that. So if you're breeding cattle or something like that, you think about you crossbreed them to sort of get the traits you want. And you can sort of go down a path of enhancement, so to speak. But there's nothing to say that path is one that couldn't be, achieved in some other way, that you would require quite a divergence from it.
So what was that word, epistasis?
Say that again.
What was the word? Sorry, Corey?
Yeah, epistasis is a phenomenon where it's specifically where genes are in epistasis with each other, meaning that they are in connection and they sort of limit each other in terms of you can't deviate too far from each other because they have to work with each other.
Right.
Cool.
But yeah, actually, I wanted to go to Martha's point too. Enhancement equals improvement, but it can be subjective. I mean, tattoos are enhancements for some people, right?
Yeah, enhancements certainly can be subjective. And, part of what I'm hearing here is that in the context of these subjective values, we seek out some kind of lever on the world, some kind of knowledge. We do some research, and then we apply that in some way to change ourselves. So built into this idea of enhancement is something stemming from who we already are out into this world of experience and resources, and then reapplying them to ourselves in desirable ways. And we call those things, of course, like research and technology, or science and technology. So Mike, if you'd go to the next slide, there's a lot of ways that we could categorize the different kinds of ways that we pursue human enhancement. I've arbitrarily divided it into three parts by its degree of practicality versus hypotheticality, if that's even a word. And so on one end of the spectrum, we have very hypothetical technologies for human enhancement. And we read about those in science fiction, of course, and many people here on this conversation tonight love science fiction. I love science fiction. There's nothing wrong with science fiction, but we have to recognize that science fiction is fiction. It's something that isn't realized. It's something that we cannot do today. But it can often inform the scientific process and inform the kinds of creative thinking that go into what ultimately become hypotheses for real-world scientific research. And then in the middle of the spectrum, I'd say we have emerging technology. And emerging technology is things where, it's no longer merely in the realm of fiction. It's now actually getting some traction in the real world, but because it's such a new technology, it may not be applicable to a lot of people. It may be very expensive and so difficult for people to access. And almost always emerging technologies present some pretty serious ethical challenges, because it's repositioning us relative to each other in our world in ways that we haven't dealt with historically. And that almost always presents new tensions and new conflicts that we have to resolve. And then on the far other end of the spectrum from hypothetical technology is what I would call practical technology. And practical technology would be things that are very broadly applicable, easy to access, and we have established ethical precedents for them. You know, we've used them for a long time, or at least long enough where people are pretty comfortable with using them. At least major segments of society have established ways of going about using them in ways that don't make each other too frustrated or too uncomfortable. So tonight, what I would like to talk about primarily with you will be practical technologies. But the reason I want to talk about that is not because the other two kinds of technologies are unimportant to me, nor do I think they should be unimportant to you. They should be very important. But sometimes as technology optimists, as transhumanists, we have a tendency sometimes to think into that science fictional future and get really excited, but then not really do anything about it. Or we look out at the news on emerging technology and we get excited and think, well, I've got wealthy friends who can maybe work in that space, or I have wealthy or highly educated friends who can do something there, but I can't really do anything except sit here and watch it. Most of us, however, can actually do something with practical technology. And I think that what we're going to talk about tonight is right there. It's practical technology that we broadly can apply for the pursuit of human enhancement. And there are a couple of categories that I would like to talk about that in particular, and those are on the next couple of slides.
Lincoln, just a quick question. I don't know if you, this is probably not centered to what you're talking about, but a drug like Aduhelm, which is a new Alzheimer's drug, there's all sorts of ethical concerns around that, not necessarily whether, it's equitable to give to people, but, safety. And so I'm sort of wondering, with what you're talking about, how much do sort of safety considerations or say interests of big pharma relative to individuals, like where do you place some of those questions within that framework?
Yeah, I would say that with new drugs haven't quite reached the practical technology. And all of this is a spectrum, of course, there'll be gray areas, but a lot of new drugs are still emerging technologies. And along with that will present novel ethical issues, as you pointed out. I think that's a good observation to make. Thank you. So nootropics. Sometimes people think of nootropics very narrowly as maybe only the third example I have on this slide, as like maybe foods or supplements or drugs. But nootropics, I would suggest, is a broad category of technologies. And that broad category of technologies are technologies for cognitive enhancement. And there are examples of nootropics that go beyond the practical technologies that we'll talk about mostly tonight. And I've got some examples listed there. The science fiction ideas of brain-computer hybrids or artificial brains. If you've ever read the science fiction book Nexus, it's a really excellent read. I highly recommend it. It's very entertaining and also very well researched. It talks about some fictional researchers who come up with it's kind of a drug actually that people ingest, and it works its way up into the brain and it reconfigures the human brain such that it can access more traditional computational capacities in kind of a seamless way, in a way that integrates directly with the person's cognition. And then they tell a whole story around what that entails for the world at large. Great series of science fiction work. Emerging technologies in the nootropic space, I would say are like brain-computer interfaces and neuroprosthetics. A lot of really cool research being done in this area right now. Some highly funded, highly invested companies are making advances in this space. We've got Neuralink, which is an Elon Musk project. We've got Brian Johnson, who's been doing some really interesting some interesting work in that space as well. And so, I'm a big fan of emerging technology in the nootropic space, but at the same time, man, it costs a lot of money, and it's not something that I can use today because, frankly, I don't want to get an incision in my skull and have a neuroprosthetic dumped in there because, for the most part, my brain works pretty well, and the risks associated with cutting open my skull today and putting something inside of it are unacceptably high for me. So I'm more interested in the practical technologies, in the practical nootropics that we'll be talking about. Next slide, Micah. Gerald Protectors. Again, sometimes people think of this narrowly. A broad definition would be any longevity enhancement technologies. And by enhancement in this case, I'd suggest that it's important that we not think of it as only quantity. Gerald Protectors are not just about, and probably not even primarily about, increasing the quantity of years that a person lives. They're probably mostly useful and most important for improving the quality of life that people have while they're living longer. And again, we have examples from the hypothetical end where, cool ideas about maybe nanobots that can repair our bodies, or even artificial bodies, completely prosthetic bodies for things like brain emulation, mind uploading type scenarios that we see in science fiction television shows and such. Emerging technologies are really interesting here. We've got technologies like CRISPR that are enabling novel and potentially very powerful interventions for not only curing disease, but also for improving how we age and combating the aging process on a very deep level. And then we've got practical ones, foods, supplements, drugs, things like that, things that we'll be talking about more this evening. So I'll pause, I'll breathe for a second and let anybody comment who wants to comment on these definitions of nootropics and Gerald Protectors, ask any questions you might have so far before we jump in to a discussion of dietary supplements in particular. Great, let's go on then. Oh.
Hey, I'm sorry, I had a question. With these enhancements, how do you think the minority community in general is being looped into this? 'Cause I always feel like with these advances in technology, there's always a segment of our population that's almost left out. I don't know if it's purposefully or something else, but it kind of feels like only the elite get access to it. And then what does that mean for the rest of us?
Yeah, Omar, such a great question. And that's why I'm a big fan of practical technology for human enhancement. Practical technologies such as foods and supplements and drugs, they are far more accessible than the emerging technologies are. They also tend to be much more affordable. And that doesn't mean it's perfect, but it does help more people than some of the narrower, far more expensive interventions that are on the cutting edge of development. So I think what you bring up, Omar, is a really big deal. It has significant ethical ramifications, and none of the practical technologies that we might imagine solve those problems perfectly, but I think they do a better job of approaching a solution.
If I could sort of comment on Omar's question too. So I'm an Alzheimer's researcher, and one of the biggest challenges in Alzheimer's research is that if we're looking at the genetics, all we really have right now are white European genetics. There's not been adequate sequencing done on different ethnicities, and particularly and I think it's relevant here. So ApoE is the gene most associated with Alzheimer's. It's also most associated with aging. And if you look at the odds ratio, so the impact that ApoE4, which is sort of the bad copy of that gene, that it has on different ethnicities, it's very different. It's most pronounced actually in the Japanese population or Asian population. Yet there's virtually no research done in this because there's not been the effort to do the large scale sequencing that we need. And so, I mean, it's just emblematic, I think, of everything that Lincoln's talking about, from the sort of highest level in terms of funding agencies, but they are aware of it because this is a major focus of the NIH at this time is underserved populations and getting more genetic information on them.
Yeah, that's really an excellent point. And it applies as much to dietary supplements as it does to drugs. We have a large and rapidly growing body of research related to dietary supplements, but guess what? It's also dependent on particular demographics, and it most strongly reflects particular demographics. And as a consequence, while it still, to some degree of reliability, may apply to demographics that are slightly different, there's open questions about, the extent of that applicability, and much more research needs to be done to help with those kinds of situations. That's really an excellent point. And it also kind of leads into, Micah, if you would go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about that. One more, please, Micah, as we talk about dietary supplements. So some general observations about dietary supplements, thinking of them in terms of technologies for human enhancement. The first observation is, unfortunately, they won't make us super intelligent immortals. I would love to tell you tonight that I've got a great supplement for you that will make you super intelligent or that will make you immortal or both. I can't. But there are some science fiction movies that suggest such things. And if you enjoy those, I highly recommend them to you. I enjoy them too. But we don't have those today, unfortunately. Another observation is that dietary supplements are generally illegal for vendors to target at disease. So while they might be applicable to some diseases, that's something that physicians could use them for. Vendors of dietary supplements can't target them that way. It's just generally not legal. So it's pretty common for vendors of dietary supplements to talk more about how supplements can enhance healthy adults, for example, rather than engage in ethically problematic and legally controversial, legally dangerous discussions of trying to use supplements for diseases. But that doesn't mean there has been no research done on the applicability of dietary supplements to diseases. There's actually been a lot of research done in that area, but vendors can't target those. Those are things that need to be done by doctors, physicians, and then ultimately run through the whole FDA process, and essentially the same process that drugs go through if people want to apply those to disease states. And a third observation about dietary supplements is that although they can't make us super intelligent immortals, they demonstrably can. There's excellent evidence for some, not for all, that they can provide incremental practical benefits. And think about this, that might sound, oh, well, that's just a tiny thing, right? Incremental practical benefits, who cares? Because I want to be a super intelligent immortal. But think about this for a second. How fast do you age? How fast do you become smarter or dumber? How fast do you develop disabilities or abilities, new skills? For almost all of us, most of the time, these things change very slowly and incrementally. And if we inject ourselves intelligently into this process of change with things that give us incremental practical benefits, then these small things can become over time major contributors to improvements to our quality of life, to our cognitive abilities, to our sense of well-being and the health that we experience as we age. Small incremental practical benefits can be a really big deal. And because they tend, in the case of dietary supplements, to be affordable and accessible, don't underestimate how important this could be. That's the third observation. And then some general advice, and then I'll kind of open up for questions about these observations and advice. Number one, dietary supplements, just like drugs and just like foods even, can be dangerous. And so you should consult a physician. You should have, even if you're not using supplements, I highly recommend that you visit your doctor, at least once a year if you're pretty healthy, maybe more often if you need to. But talk to your doctor about supplements that you want to take, that you are taking, and just keep them in the loop and listen to their advice and share what you learn with them and share studies with them potentially even, and help them see what you're seeing and talk about it. It's always good to keep our physicians in the loop. Second piece of advice. When you're looking at dietary supplements, I recommend that you look for those that are backed by multiple controlled human studies. Let me break down what I mean by these things. Lots of dietary supplements, like many drugs, have only been tested in test tubes or lab rats or other lab animals, and never have been tested in humans to any significant degree. Because of that, their effects on humans are either unknown or not dependable. So look for human studies. Now, what do we mean by controlled studies? A control is something that helps you determine the difference between when you take the supplement versus when you take maybe an alternative or don't take the supplement. So controlled studies will compare the two. And this is important because placebo is powerful. Placebo is real. Placebo is not fake. In fact, all of the best studies that are done on drugs and supplements are placebo controlled. And that's because placebo is such an important factor in how substances that we put in our mouths or otherwise in our bodies affect us. And so controlled studies help us determine whether something is actually effective beyond what placebo might do. And then the word multiple, there are some things that have been studied once in humans, some things that have been studied once in humans with placebo control, but really the best supplements have been tested multiple times in humans with controls. Those are the best supplements. Those are the ones, well, depending on the results of the study, those are the most dependable results. Now, whether those dependable results demonstrate that nothing happens or bad things happen or good things happen, of course, depends on the supplement. So what you really want to look for is a supplement with multiple controlled human studies that show good things happening, whatever that good thing is that you care about. Third piece of advice, look for third-party verification of quality. And I really can't overemphasize how important this is in the dietary supplement industry today. There are a lot of very shady actors in the industry who, both as suppliers and vendors, who will put things in supplements that aren't what they claim to be. And sometimes those things are actually dangerous. Sometimes those things are just not what you wanted to buy. I unfortunately have firsthand experience of having suppliers lie to me, putting on the label of something, the name of a supplement that I wanted, but then giving me something else entirely. Fortunately, we caught that through third-party testing of those materials. But there are vendors out there who don't do their own testing. They just kind of take a supplier's word for it. So when you're out there looking for supplements, I highly recommend that you verify that your vendor is doing third-party verification of the quality. And by quality, I mean the identity of the supplement, that it's the right thing, the potency, that it has the right potency that you're expecting on the label, and also the safety, testing for microbes, testing for heavy metals, things like that. Identity, potency, and safety. If they're not doing third-party verification of those things, you should not be trusting that vendor of a dietary supplement. And that leads to the fourth piece of advice. How do you know if they're not disclosing it? If the vendor of your dietary supplement is not disclosing those tests, change providers or ask them, say, hey, do you have certificates of analysis that test for identity, potency, and safety? I want to see them. If they won't share those with you, change providers. Another disclosure that's important is dose. When human studies are done on supplements, those studies are done with particular doses. It's not dose arbitrary. You can't just say, oh, I did this study, and in this study, it turns out that L-theanine is a great nootropic. Well, yeah, but it's a great nootropic at doses of, say, 100 to 200 milligrams. If there's only 5 milligrams of L-theanine in your supplement, it's not been tested for any efficacy at that level. So dose matters. And unfortunately, a lot of dietary supplement vendors hide their doses behind proprietary blends. And it's legal for them to do that. If they're doing that, again, I recommend that you switch providers. Look for disclosure of doses. And then another thing that I think is very important, but almost no dietary supplement providers do, is disclose their suppliers. Where are they getting the materials that they're including? And what did the suppliers claim about those materials? Very, very few vendors provide that information, but some do. And in my experience, they're by far the most trustworthy vendors on the market. So look for that. That's more advice. So questions about these observations or advice before we get into particular nootropics and Gerald Protectors? I think I saw some flash up on my screen. I can't see the historical comments. Maybe if somebody wants to read those back, that would be helpful.
I put it on the chat, but as you were discussing, the advice and everything we need to check, my immediate thought was, okay, check that they're FDA approved if I can go through the lengthy process. But most supplements are unlikely to be FDA approved, right?
Okay, so yeah, FDA approval. That's a challenging concept in the dietary supplement industry. All pharmaceuticals have to be FDA approved in the United States of America. But dietary supplements can go to market, and generally do go to market, without FDA approval per se. There are things that dietary supplement manufacturers are supposed to do before they take the supplement to market. But the FDA does not directly and explicitly approve the supplements as they go to market. So if somebody tells you that their dietary supplement is FDA approved, chances are they're lying, because the way that you receive FDA approval is that you go through a lengthy process like what pharmaceutical vendors do. And that is, in almost all cases with dietary supplements, cost prohibitive. Almost nobody does that for good reason. It wouldn't work. No business could be started based on that. But the FDA does have standards in place and does regularly audit the manufacturing facilities that dietary supplement vendors should be using. So what you can check for is to see if a particular dietary supplement is manufactured in an FDA approved facility. That you can do, and that you should do, and that can help you to some extent. But unfortunately, even there, my experience is that some FDA approved facilities are better than others. And the best way for you to know that is to look for the kinds of things that I put in the advice, those bullet points there. Does that help, or was that more confusing?
No, that was very helpful, actually. I asked you because of the red tape. You just couldn't get FDA approval, so that matches what I was thinking. But I didn't know I could look for the facilities to be FDA checked.
Yep, the facilities are if a dietary supplement is not manufactured in an FDA approved facility, run away. Bad choice. Switch vendors. But you should be able to ask your vendor if their dietary supplement is manufactured in an FDA approved facility, and ask them for evidence of that. If they won't provide evidence of that, switch vendors. Just like the disclosure of suppliers, very few vendors will do that, but I highly recommend it. And if they're not willing to share that kind of information with you, I wonder what they're trying to hide. Other questions about this advice or these observations?
Yeah, we had a couple other things in the chat. Anyone want to jump in on those? Jonathan says, what do you think of iherb.com or iherb.com, depending on which version of English you use, as a marketplace?
Okay, yeah, I'll answer that question directly, and also something that it implies a little bit more broadly. iHerb in particular, I've not used it myself. I have heard about it from other people, and it seems okay as marketplaces go. Amazon also seems okay, and there are a few at like vitamins.com, I think seems okay. More important than the marketplace, however, is the vendor, because almost all of these marketplaces allow multiple vendors onto their marketplace and pull in products from multiple vendors. I would look at the actual manufacturer or distributor rather than just the marketplace brand when you're trying to make these decisions about whether these supplements are coming with good science behind them, good quality, good disclosures. The marketplace tends not to have a lot of influence on answering those questions. It's more a question of looking at the actual manufacturer, distributor as the vendor rather than the marketplace.
I also had a question. Do you consider some surgeries as practical technology, such as bariatric surgery for people with obesity or diabetes type 2?
Sure. Yeah. When we're talking about Gerald Protectors or Nootropics or any human enhancement more broadly, for sure, surgeries and even lifestyle interventions in the cultural sense of cultural technologies, these can all be important things to engage in, of course. And in fact, we may in the future wish to do some presentations on simple lifestyle interventions that can make really, again, practical incremental differences, benefits to our lives in both cognitive and longevity ways. So yeah, surgeries can also contribute there, of course. What do I think of Shakeology? I'm not familiar with Shakeology, unfortunately. And so there will be a lot of brands out there, some of which I am familiar with, and I'm happy to tell you which ones I'm familiar with if you ask about specific brands. A lot of them I won't be familiar with just because there's so many brands now. But in all cases, what I'd recommend you try to do is either look on their website and find this information that I've outlined in the advice section, or contact them and ask for it. Say, hey, do you have human studies that back up your stuff, the ingredients in your supplements? Do you have third-party verification of the quality? And if so, can you share links to those studies? Can you share the documents that outline the tests that have been done and what results were received and who did those tests? Were those tests only done by your suppliers, or were they verified by third parties afterwards? And those kinds of questions, ask them by email and see what they say. The most trustworthy suppliers will give you more information, and if they hesitate to give you information, change suppliers. And one other note on the science front: two excellent sources for finding science on dietary supplements. Number one is by far the best, but also requires a little bit more effort because it's like going right to the source, is PubMed. PubMed is a very large database of that indexes clinical studies that have been done on all kinds of things, but that it also includes dietary supplements. And you can do searches there. You can put in a search for something like, I've already mentioned L-theanine. Go do a search at PubMed for L-theanine, and then you can filter that search by controlled studies, controlled human studies. So you can see, oh, L-theanine has a whole bunch of controlled human studies. That's already a good thing. Multiple controlled human studies, thumbs up on L-theanine. It's pretty obvious when you do that search on PubMed. And then you can go in and a lot of those studies will end up being public domain, and you can read the details of what those studies observed. Another resource for assessing the science that I like a lot and that is easier for most people to digest than going directly to PubMed is a website called examine.com. I'm a big fan of what they do. They don't sell any supplements themselves, but they do analysis on dietary supplement science and studies. And they do really great analysis that's generally pretty easy to consume for most people. So good place to look as well as examine.com. All right, let's talk about nootropics. I have proposed to you here that these are the best nootropic supplements, these 8. And let me tell you a little bit about how I came up with this list of the 8 best nootropic supplements. My business uses an algorithm that stack ranks dietary supplement materials based on levels of evidence, magnitude of effect, and safety from decades of research from scientists around the world. And then once they are stack ranked, we select those with the highest cumulative score according to our algorithm, and we develop formulas around them. What I'm sharing with you here is not all of the highest ranked nootropics that our algorithm has output based on our research, but 8 of my favorite right at the top. So most of this, the fact that they're here is that they surpassed this algorithmic threshold that my business uses. And then the specific 8 that are here are because I particularly like them. And I'm happy to talk more about that algorithm if anybody wants to get nerdy on that with me later on. But let's talk about these nootropics. Number 1, melatonin. Most people have heard of melatonin. In the United States, melatonin is classified as a supplement. In some countries, melatonin, however, is classified as a drug based on local laws. Anyway, it's number 1 in my list of the best nootropic supplements because it has high levels of evidence. It has a notable magnitude of effect. And so it's quite dependable based on the evidence for inducing sleep. Now, melatonin, as it turns out, has a lot of other benefits too. In fact, it's one of my favorite Gerald Protectors, but it is a favorite Gerald Protector for reasons that are still emerging science. They aren't as well established. In established science, melatonin works for sleep for most people. Now, keep in mind that scientific studies are based on probabilities. They're based on demographics. We talked about that earlier. Keep all of that in mind. Your particular case might be different. You should talk about it with your doctor. But generally speaking, high levels of evidence for notable magnitudes of effect for melatonin for sleep. Number 2, omega-3. Fish oil is an example of a source, probably the most popular source for omega-3. Omega-3 has great evidence for notable magnitudes of effect for improving mood. Some doctors even prescribe it, among other things, when people are trying to deal with depression. But for human enhancement enthusiasts such as ourselves, it may contribute positively to helping you maintain and support a healthy mood. Number 3, rhodiola rosea. This is an herb, and this is a tricky one because there are multiple species of the herb. Rhodiola also comes in the rhodiola crenulata form, which has some interesting and potentially useful effects, but is much less well studied. And rhodiola rosea is notable in the dietary supplement industry for having dishonest vendors. There are people who will try to sell you something called rhodiola rosea, and what they'll actually give you is rhodiola crenulata, and you won't be getting what you're paying for. So keep that in mind as you're looking for vendors of this supplement. Rhodiola rosea has really great science behind it. Again, if you want to check out the details, go to PubMed, type in rhodiola rosea, filter it by human studies, filter it by controlled studies. One of the best applications of it is for energy. And one of the nice things about rhodiola compared to, say, caffeine is that it's more sustainable. You won't build up a dependency to it like you will with caffeine. And it's also known as an adaptogen. So if you're kind of like too high, it will even you out. If you're too low, it'll pick you up. Rhodiola rosea, an herb. Number 4, saffron, a spice, also good for mood. Good science on that, pretty good. Although a lot of that science comes from one region of the world, notably the Middle East. Some interesting questions asked about that, but the science is pretty good behind that. Saffron for mood. Number 5, another adaptogen, ashwagandha. Like rhodiola rosea, it's an adaptogen, has some benefits for promoting energy. And particularly for ashwagandha, I'd say it helps promote focus, kind of can help relieve stress, take away the distraction, and help you get to work in effective ways. Number 6, Bacopa monnieri is also an herb, and it is by far the most well-studied nootropic for memory enhancement. Many good studies supporting its ability to improve memory, but it doesn't work immediately. It builds up in your system over a period of 2 to 3 months. And as it turns out, because it builds up slowly, most people don't just notice it. The best way to verify that it's working for you would be to take a memory test before you start supplementing with it, and then at 2 to 3 months in, and compare the results. And that's what people do in the human studies that have demonstrated its efficacy repeatedly. Number 7, inositol. Again, for focus, inositol is interesting because it seems to be particularly effective and well-studied in cases where people are experiencing high stress, even maybe panic level stress. And inositol can help deal with those sorts of challenges. And then L-theanine, number 8. L-theanine is a very flexible nootropic. I have it listed here for helping to improve focus. Really what it's great for is for promoting a sense of calm. Some people pair it very effectively with caffeine, and that might sound strange, but when paired with caffeine, L-theanine will take the edge and the jitters off of the caffeines, but it won't take away from the energy. So you'll get the energy from the caffeine, but it will be smoother, so to speak. So you might also consider pairing L-theanine with something like rhodiola rosea, which is a more sustainable, although not as strong as caffeine for promoting energy. L-theanine also pairs really well with melatonin. So it can help calm you down. Melatonin can help put you to sleep. So the pair tend to be a pretty good bedtime nootropic routine. And then on its own, L-theanine does have some, it does tend to just be calming without being sedative on its own. If you want it to be sedative, take melatonin with it. So those are my top 8 nootropics. Any questions or comments about those?
Yeah, I had put in the chat before. I thought fish oil helped during pregnancy for brain development of the baby. Does that mean you could support an adult brain health as well?
There is varying levels of evidence about how it supports brain health generally. The best evidence is what I'm mentioning here for omega-3, and that's for enhancing and supporting healthy mood. But there is evidence in the other areas that you have just mentioned as well, just not the same level of evidence.
And how about DHA?
Did you say DHA?
Yes.
Yeah, so omega-3 includes both EPA and DHA, as you're pointing out, 2 different forms of omega-3. And there's actually a lot of ongoing research on both of those, and they do tend to have different effects. We could go down quite a rabbit hole, and some of it actually is controversial because it hasn't been really well replicated yet in different studies. But I guess for now, suffice it to say that EPA and DHA do probably have somewhat different effects, and it's worth considering whether you want to use one or both.
She wants me to turn off the lights.
Another thing I'll mention on omega-3 as well is that there's a really exciting recent technological innovation in omega-3. It's called omega-3 lysine complex. It's where EPA and DHA molecules are complexed with a lysine molecule. And as a consequence, it becomes much more bioavailable. So you can take much smaller doses of omega-3 and get the same level of bioavailability that you would get from taking higher doses of fish oil, for example. An omega-3 lysine complex is a it's a powder rather than a oil like fish oil. And as it turns out, it's 5 times more bioavailable than traditional fish oil. So yeah, different kinds of omega-3 are available, somewhat varying effects among them. It's worth looking at the specific research for individual things, but generally speaking, for most people, omega-3, there's a lot of evidence that it helps with mood. That's its strongest nootropic effect. Most well evidenced, let's say. Other questions?
Neil asked, is there a good way to avoid the dreaded fish oil breath?
Yes, there is. Omega-3 lysine complex has no fishy smell, has no fishy taste, in addition to being 5 times more bioavailable.
Lincoln, something that I see talked about a lot or suggested a lot in these kinds of discussions is choline. So I wonder what you think about that, particularly as paired with other things.
Yeah, choline I didn't include in my list of the top 8 here, but it's still a first tier nootropic, but it depends a lot on what kind of choline you use. If you use just standard choline that you get in a multivitamin, it's probably not doing much for you because standard choline doesn't seem to be very bioavailable. There are 2 forms of choline that are much better. And one of them is better than the other. The second best one is CDP choline. Some people call it city choline, and that will do a better job of getting choline into your system. And choline is very important for your brain health, both near term and long term. The most bioavailable form of choline, the best way to get choline into your body and particularly into your brain, is called alpha GPC. It's the form of choline that I would recommend to you if you want to supplement with choline, which is an important component of long-term brain health.
I don't want to hijack the meeting because I know I have little time. Can you expand a little on the caffeine criticism? I'm sure I can Google it and find a lot, but Latin here, coffee is just in our blood. I am getting worried as I hear you comment on it.
Yeah, so my advice on caffeine is that people use it sparingly. It's a very effective nootropic as long as it's not overused. If you overuse it, you develop a tolerance to it and it becomes less effective quickly. So, you know, I use nootropic as a pre-workout before I go to the gym. Maybe I use it between 2 and 4 times a week, but I don't use it more than that. And I always pair it with L-theanine. And of course, be careful with caffeine. It is possible to overdose on caffeine and it can do some serious damage to you if you use a lot of it. All right, let's go to the next slide. Best Gerald Protectors. Same background here. This is based on an algorithm that stack ranks based on evidence and efficacy, and filtered for safety. And then within those top ranked Gerald Protectors, I selected my 8 favorite. Number 1, creatine. Creatine also happens to be a good nootropic. It's really good for your brain, but its highest levels of evidence for efficacy is in strength. And don't worry. Some people worry that it's going to make you look like one of those bodybuilders with veins sticking out everywhere. It doesn't do that. You'll need to take steroids if you want to look like that. Creatine is very safe, generally speaking, for most people, and I highly recommend it. In fact, I've often told people, if you're only going to take one supplement, take creatine. It's good for your brain. It's good for your body. It's good for your workouts. Really great, safe, powerful supplement. Number 2, omega-3. That was also on my nootropic list, of course. Here, it's on my list for heart health, to promote heart health for healthy aging. Some people think that it helps with cholesterol. The evidence for that is actually really mixed. Where it has good evidence is for triglyceride, supporting healthy triglyceride levels. If you want to do something about cholesterol, supporting healthy cholesterol levels, actually look at number 4, and that's garlic. Garlic has great evidence for supporting healthy cholesterol levels. Number 3, berberine is one of my favorite Geru protectors. It is has a powerful effect on metabolism and on blood sugar. And some people have compared it in various ways with metformin, which is a drug that people, on label, metformin is used for diabetes, of course, but people take metformin off label as a geroprotector drug to help with healthy aging. And berberine has some of the same kinds of effects on metabolism. Good evidence there. But again, make sure you talk with your doctor before you use any of these things. Berberine can interact with some drugs and have some interactive physiological effects. If you already have, like, say, really low levels of blood sugar, you might want to take care with this. But generally, it's a pretty safe supplement. Number 5, vitamin K2 MK7 is, so far as I know in all the research I've ever done, by far the best supplement for bones. Now, this K2 MK7 is important. There's lots of forms of vitamin K. And vitamin K1, evidence is at best mixed for whether it helps with bones. Vitamin K2 MK4, it works for helping with healthy bones, for healthy aging, but it takes gigantic doses. Vitamin K2 MK7 only requires small doses, and it has really good evidence for helping with bone health for healthy aging. Number 6, blueberry, good evidence for helping protect DNA for healthy aging. Love blueberry, an excellent geroprotector supplement. Also happens to be a solid nootropic for brain health as well. Number 7, Boswellia serrata is a resin, and it has good evidence for supporting joint health for healthy aging, keeping your joints working well. And then number 8, TUDCA, and that stands for tauroursodeoxycholic acid. It's a good geroprotector for the liver and for the gallbladder, and also actually has a lot of interesting metabolic effects. So helps with healthy aging, a part of the digestive system, and then may have more somewhat more hypothetical, still to be determined effects for healthy aging that I think are really promising. Similar with melatonin, I mentioned, has some hypothetical effects that are worth looking at as well for healthy aging. All right, so those are my favorite nootropics and geroprotectors. What questions can I answer at this point?
We've got a few questions in the chat. Jonathan says creatine improves my exercise tolerance at least 50%. And we had a question, is there any brand of creatine that you recommend? Creatine is if you get it from a well-known brand, you'll probably be all right. But I use, what is it? Shoot, I'm forgetting the brand that I use. Anyway, I'm forgetting the brand. It's not one that tends to be difficult to get a good vendor for. Shoot, I wish I could remember the one. Optimum Nutrition. That's the one that I'm using. There you go.
What are your thoughts on glucosamine?
Glucosamine. So this one's funny. If you're thinking of using glucosamine for joints and bones, meh. At best, mixed evidence that it's beneficial. Where glucosamine has recently begun to shine, however, is as a general purpose geroprotector. There have been some tests that have suggested that all-cause mortality rates improve with long-term glucosamine supplementation. So might be worth looking at for that reason.
What would you recommend? I mean, other than what Boswellia, I think is what you called it, for joints, especially. I have a little arthritis in my knees and ankles.
Yeah, so I would recommend that you combine Boswellia, and there's unfortunately, if you just buy Boswellia serrata, it will typically come as like in a more raw form, and you'll have to take really large doses of it to have it work, as demonstrated in clinical studies. But there are some standardized extracts of Boswellia that require much smaller doses and have good evidence to support those smaller doses for joint benefits. One of those brands, the one I would recommend, is called Apreflex, APRES FLEX. And if you really want to power up your joint enhancement, I would combine Apreflex with turmeric, curcumin, with vitamin K2, MK7, and probably with some vitamin D and S-adenosylmethionine. Put all of those together and you've got S-adenosylmethionine. People usually...
No, I'm sorry, the first thing you mentioned, Apreflex?
Apreflex.
Yeah, can you spell that again? I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. APRES FLEX.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask you a loaded question.
Yeah.
Can I get this stuff on Amazon? And I know a lot of people have issues with Amazon, but it's the easiest way I can get a lot of the stuff I get. So.
Yep, you can get this stuff on Amazon. Again, I encourage you to choose a particular manufacturer or distributor on Amazon, however, that does the things that I advised on that previous slide that we went through together. Not all of the providers on Amazon are ethical or dependable.
Do you have any in particular that you would recommend?
You'll have to look at my caveat on the very first slide. I'm really highly biased on this one because I actually sell a product there.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, just one more question. Can you put the link in the chat of where you sell your stuff? If any of us are interested.
There you go. It just got posted.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It may save us some time to do all that research.
Keep in mind that I'm biased, though. I want that to be clear.
Yes.
I'm biased.
Yes, we got
Lincoln, when you say blueberry, I'm assuming that's just like eating blueberries, or are you talking about like a blueberry supplemented kind of condensed version, or just eating blueberries is fine?
You can do it either way. If you're going to eat blueberries, though, you'll have to eat a lot to get the levels that reflect clinical studies. The easiest
I'm okay
way to
with
get
that.
Yeah, I mean, if you can do that every day, power to you. There's no way I can eat that many blueberries every day. The easiest way to do it is to use a blueberry anthocyanin extract, and then it's pretty easy to get a dose that reflects clinical studies.
Lincoln, I got kicked off a minute ago. Should I put that back on the screen, or?
At this point, I don't think it's necessary. There was only one slide left, and it just included some recommendations of supplements to ignore or avoid. And I can just mention them in passing, and then we can keep talking for those who want to keep talking and let those who need to go. Some nootropics that I recommend avoiding. And I'm going to set myself up for not being very popular here, I think, among some of us, but I'm going to say it anyway. Alcohol is not a good nootropic. Sorry, folks. Sometimes people promote it for, maybe mood or to promote sociality or something, but the evidence actually suggests that there are exceptionally high health and social costs to alcohol. Another one that I'm not going to be popular for is nicotine. Nicotine is often promoted as a way to improve focus, but the evidence suggests that it produces tolerance pretty rapidly and that it actually decreases focus when you try to withdraw from it. Another one, this one won't be as controversial in this group, and that is apoacorin. You've probably heard of the product called Provagen. It's being sold among senior citizens in our communities like, I don't know, they're popping it like candy, and it doesn't do anything. The evidence suggests that it's not bioavailable. So it's a total waste of money, and I think the company selling it is ethically bankrupt. But anyway, that's purports to be a nootropic, and it's just not. If you want to improve your memory, don't try Provagen. Go use Bacopa monnieri. That one has real evidence behind it. Some Gerald Protectors to avoid or ignore. One I listed was yohimbine. People sometimes use yohimbine to promote an improved metabolism, maybe for weight loss or maybe just for general health. But there's good evidence that it actually decreases focus and it can even often enhances anxiety, actually. Another thing that people take as a Gerald Protector often, because they often do it in kind of like an a just in case mentality, and that's a multivitamin. But the problem is that almost all multivitamins use really poor quality vitamins, and they tend to include excessive amounts of certain minerals that are really big culprits in like poison control settings among seniors. So multivitamins, for in a lot of cases, they're generally safe, but I don't think they're worth the money. And in some cases, they might even be unhealthy. And another one, and this one also won't make me popular, but I'm going to say it anyway. CBD. People promote it for all kinds of things, like magical plant these days. And again, I'm talking about CBD in particular. THC is a whole other issue, and it's not generally legal, so that's not what I'm talking about. But CBD, in particular, people promote it for like joint health, but the levels of evidence and the magnitude of effect associated with CBD are just relatively poor. There's better options if you're looking for things that will help with joints for healthy aging. And I've mentioned several of them have better evidence and higher, better evidence for better magnitudes of effect. So those were just some supplements I would suggest you ignore or avoid.
Lincoln, I want to go back to, I think you said nicotine. Are you speaking broadly as in like NMN, like nicotinamide mononucleotide?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No, nicotinamide and or nicotinamide riboside or niacin. These are forms of vitamin B3. And those actually have some really interesting potential as Gerald Protectors. So yeah, I'm definitely not talking about those. I'm talking about nicotine.
Cool. I just wanted to clarify on that. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey, for bringing that up. Hey, I should mention, by the way, that Corey actually is a science advisor for my business, and he's a really an intelligent and well-educated bioscientist.
Thank you. That's very kind. And I have the same biases I think that Lincoln does in some respect on some of what he's saying. Although I've not done the kind of research that Lincoln has done on these supplements by any means. My area is really on Alzheimer's. So, I'm more about treating people who are ill or trying to prevent Alzheimer's as opposed to enhancement.
What other questions do people have? I'm happy to talk about anything that we've already brought up in more depth or tangential issues that are coming to mind.
Are there any other foods interesting like that blueberry recommendation that you would like to recommend?
Yeah, so as far as foods go, blueberries are a great food. Fish, salmon, it's a good way to get omega-3s. Other great foods, nuts are ways of getting, particularly a good mix of nuts is a good way to get healthy fats of various kinds into your system. Make sure you're getting fiber and protein in your diet. Fiber is a big deal. Psyllium is a good way to supplement with fiber if you need it, but fruits and vegetables can also help you get enough fiber into your system. And having enough fiber in your system helps support a healthy metabolism, which will help a lot with healthy aging. This just, kind of opens the door to a huge discussion we could have about healthy diets. And to be honest, people underestimate how important that is for healthy aging, and people underestimate how technological it is. Our diets are built on foods that are the products of agriculture that are the result of thousands of years of technological innovation. Our diets are definitely technologies, cultural technologies, and even more traditional, machine technologies go into producing them. And the foods themselves have been domesticated in many cases and changed over time. We are consuming technology constantly in our diets, and it matters a lot. It programs our bodies just like supplements and drugs do. Did I see something else flash on the screen? Sorry.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat. Do you recommend keto, paleo, etc.?
My number one recommendation is the Mediterranean diet, just based on the levels of evidence associated with it in the scientific literature. I know that keto and paleo are pretty popular these days, but just being matter of fact about it, the levels of evidence for their long-term benefits are lower than the levels of evidence for the Mediterranean diet. That doesn't mean that keto and paleo don't have great potential and might be very beneficial, particularly in some cases for people. Talk to your doctor, but I'm just saying evidence, as far as my knowledge of it goes, suggests that Mediterranean is the most well evidenced for long-term health.
What about and would you think about exercise in this category? Would you have similar recommendations about that?
Yeah, lots of lifestyle things, exercise being at the top, well, almost the top of the list. I'd say sleep is more important than exercise. But yeah, if you're not getting regular exercise, change and do that. Get some kind of regular exercise, even if it's just walking. And the latest data seems to suggest that it doesn't even need to be 10,000 steps. You could probably optimal amount is around 7,000 steps from what I understand from the latest research. But if you're not getting enough sleep, change your sleeping habits. Go into a room that's darker. Make sure that you aren't eating too late in the evening, and make sure you're getting enough sleep. These things will make major differences to your cognition. They'll make major differences to your healthy aging. These sorts of lifestyle interventions are a big deal when it comes to human enhancement.
Yeah, any other questions? I think that lifestyle stuff is like you suggested, it's probably something we should do a number of other talks on, maybe. Particularly relevant for us would be things like meditation, prayer, community, friendship, reading, certain kinds of media consumption, things like that, which seem like they could all kind of play into mental health, and I would imagine physical health downstream from that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Some of those things that you mentioned have surprisingly high levels of evidence too in the scientific literature, supporting their efficacy for improving cognition and improving longevity, healthy longevity. Really, there's just so much value in rethinking how we're living our lives, the things that we're taking into our bodies, the way we're sleeping, the way we're exercising, the way we're relaxing, the way we're meditating, the way we're interrelating. So much potential for really improving our brains and our bodies and our relationships in our world by thinking through all of these things. Definitely cultural technology is an important thing. And I think that's where that kind of fits into the technological paradigm. Cultural technology is a real thing, things that we've learned to do and have done for even millennia in some cases, that are science, modern science now shows, yep, there's evidence that it does what we kind of intuitively felt all along.
Yeah, kind of related to that question about how we bring supplements in with eating and morning versus evening, and does it break intermittent fasting? So these are these other routines and rituals. How does that kind of fit in optimally?
Yeah, so I practice intermittent fasting. I eat only 8 hours per day. Ideally, I would suggest that intermittent fasting is best when you eat first thing in the morning and you stop eating, maybe you only eat for 4 hours or you eat for 8 hours, but you stop eating earlier. For social reasons, for cultural technology reasons, I actually fast until noon, and I eat from noon till 8. So I take my supplements twice a day. I take them with lunch and with dinner. And so I divide my doses between those meals. And then before I go to bed, I also take a small number of supplements as well. But most of the supplements that I take at lunch and dinner. And then I fast from 8 p.m. until noon the next day. And I've been doing that for years, and it works well for me.
What time do you go to bed?
I usually go to bed about midnight, wake up around 7:30.
Okay, so if you start eating at noon, this is very important. Do you eat breakfast at noon, or do you eat lunch at noon?
Either one. Either one.
So we're not giving up breakfast foods then.
Oh no, you don't have to give up any kinds of foods. I mean, of course, we should always be thinking through, how does this food interact with my body as an input into the algorithm that I am, of course, right? But no, I mean, I love eggs. And so I'll have eggs for lunch whenever I get the opportunity.
So taking supplements before going to bed does not break the fasting?
If you take a lot of supplements, it would probably have a little bit of a negative effect on the benefits of fasting. I only take one supplement before I go to bed, and that's my sleep supplement. It contains melatonin and a few other things like L-theanine that I mentioned earlier. And it has really there's not really any calories in it. So it has a minimal impact on any fasting that's going on.
I like your phrase there, Lincoln, the algorithm that I am. I think I'm going to use that. I feel like that has a lot of applicability.
Yeah, I think it's a valuable, practical approach to understanding ourselves. We're biological machines. We are spiritual machines. We are spiritual algorithms, biological algorithms. However you want to think about it, we have inputs and we have outputs, and we are very complex, very, very complex. But the inputs and outputs have real consequences on ourselves and on people and environments around us. And it's worth thinking about. It's not worth stressing about, because stress, of course, will be a negative input, but it's worth thinking about to the extent that we can, and talking with people who are informed to help us along the way. Taking a practical, not a stressed out chicken with its head cut off approach, but with I have questions, I want to make improvements, and I'll do what I can along the way. I think that's a healthy way to approach it.
All right. Any other questions? Well, if not, Lincoln, this has been great. Thanks so much for doing this. I would encourage people to join us next month. We do these kinds of talks monthly first Thursdays. So I think our next one is November 4th, Thursday, November 4th. And yeah, I would encourage people to join us for that. But yeah, thank you so much, Lincoln. And yeah, look forward to talking more about this stuff in the future.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Lincoln. This is great. I really appreciate it.
Very welcome.
Good night, everyone. Thanks so much.
Like.
Thank you.